All right, for our first remote study in replacement of our Bible study until we can meet back together again, we're going to be going through the book of Matthew. Now, we had been going through the book of Matthew on Sunday mornings, and we made it through almost the end of chapter 2, but not everybody's been able to come, and we've had different people come on one Sunday, and then they're gone another. And so we're just going to start over from the very beginning and lay the foundation and context for this book, and then we'll just do short 5, maybe 7-minute videos a maximum. And I hope to do these weekly so we can study and encourage your reading of the book of Matthew and your investigation of the text. So if you don't have your Bible, go ahead and get your Bible. And what we want to talk about today is just setting the context. And the main headings I want us to encourage to investigate and consider whenever we start any book of the Bible is author, the date, when it was written, the audience who it was written to, the structure of the book itself. And we're not going to get into this too much, but there are some big pieces that can be very illuminating for our study. And lastly, what is the purpose? Why did the author himself write? So when you pick up a study Bible, and I would encourage you to get like a ESV study Bible or New King James Version study Bible is one I used for many years. All are very good. And don't skip over that introductory material because it lays the context. And all of this information is very important and will help you understand the book in much greater detail. And it'll keep you from the error of proof texting and just going to a text, making yourself the center of the meaning of what that's about and that it's to you primarily and you're the hero of the stories. We don't want to do any of those injustices to the text. So we want to put this in its context and come to its meaning. So let's talk about the author for a second. The book of Matthew is written by Matthew. Now, none of the Gospels actually have like a byline that says the book of Matthew, the Gospel according to Matthew, like they opened up a page or something on the papyri and there it is. But this is witnessed to in church history unanimously from the church fathers. This is the same Matthew who in Luke 5, and he has another name, Levi, that he's called from the tax booth by Jesus to be a disciple and come follow him. It's written in the 50s or 60s, perhaps. But what's more, and this is 80, this is the first century. What's more important for us to recognize for setting this in context, and we'll talk about this in the next video as well, is that this is the first, well, perhaps Mark was the first gospel. There's a small debate about that. But in either case, the Gospels and the New Testament writings are coming onto the scene after a 400-year gap of silence between the Old Testament and the New Testament. So the Old Testament ends, and it can end in two ways. One, it's there's this long expected pregnant anticipation of the awaited Messiah. So we have Ezra and Nehemiah return to the land, the rebuilding of the temple, the rebuildings of the wall, the restoration of that temple, and then the reading of the law publicly. And there's a hope in which that the king will now return. So although the Jewish people had returned to the land back here in the Old Testament, back from exile, they hadn't actually put back a king on the throne. And they believed and they were looking for the long-awaited Messiah to come save them and for the heir from the lineage of David to come. But that doesn't happen. There's what's called the silence of heavens, and it's like this bracketed period where nothing happens. Prophets cease to be among them, and no authoritative utterances are made. Nothing is added to the canon. It's in this period that you have deuterocanonical books, as the Catholic Church would call them, like Maccabees. Histories are written, and it's a real history. Those things happened, but they're not authoritative for a reason. We could talk about that in a different video. And so when Matthew is writing, although he writes in the 50s or 60s, this happens about 30 years after the ministry of Christ. It's into a New Testament context of Israel was awaiting their Messiah. And that goes right into Matthew's audience. His first audience is to the Jews. And this is very plain from his structure of the book. 5 major discourses. It leaves things untranslated that a Jew would have picked up on right away. Very linear compared to the other gospels. Very logical, very easy to memorize compared to the other 3. Has 5 major discourses. This gets into the structure right here. 5 major discourses. And it's bookended itself by indicators that this story is part of a larger story that's moving toward the Gentiles. So you have an audience of the Jews where Matthew is very concerned, this gets down to purpose, with proving that Jesus is a long-awaited Messiah. He is a long-awaited Messiah. And yet, there's also the secondary audience of Gentiles, and you'll see this in our next video. In the lineage of Christ includes Gentiles. And the very end of Matthew, this bookend that has echoes of the Abrahamic promise to go to all nations. Well, that's an illusion, and that's going to back to roping in, grafting in the Gentiles. So that's a secondary audience, but not to be overlooked. So his purpose in doing that, right? So really 3, there's several purposes, but we could summarize 3. 1, to point to Jesus. We'll say that. Point to Jesus, that he's the Messiah. 2, or B here, is that there's a supremacy of Jesus, that he is the right to the throne of David, but his supremacy even over the demonic realm, over the spiritual realm. So we call that the supremacy of Christ displayed. Excuse my handwriting. I'm going to adjust the stylus in the next video. And a third purpose, but this is exhaustive, it to show the fulfillment of the law of God. We'll just put law here. And then this is evidenced by this constant clash and tension between the Pharisees, the scribes, other religious leaders over the interpretation of the Old Testament law, which Jesus never abolishes or abandons, but actually fulfills and is obedient to, even unto death. So holding these 5 major headings in place are author, date, audience, the structure, those 5 discourses bookended by pointing to the Gentiles, and the purpose. This sets forth the stage for understanding and reading the book of Matthew.